Ken, welcome.
Hey, Molly.
How are you?
I'm doing all right.
We are just in autocracy. Welcome. Welcome to autocracy. I mean, that's where we are, right?
We're definitely an oligarchy. There's no question about that. I mean, look at the inauguration. How many billionaires were in the room? It was crazy.
Right.
It was like they were inaugurating Trump.
That's right. He's put a lot of the people from season one who couldn't even get into the island, right? Like if this is Survivor, there was like a group of people in season one where they was like, no, no, you can't put that person on television, right? Those people now run the federal government.
Yeah, I've done several stories on Sebastian Gorka, who had,
Yes.
he was like a
Dr.
strategist position
Sebastian
in
Gorka.
right. He had like a strategist position in the White House from which he was fired for very controversial circumstances people can look up. But he was brought
Right.
back in and put in charge of all of counterterrorism policy for the United States. And he's hardly gotten any attention.
No.
Even though I just reported a couple weeks ago, he's rewriting the strategy to counter domestic terrorism. At
To
the
go
same time
after
that he's going,
us,
yeah, at the
basically,
same time, well, he's
right?
literally gone on Newsmax, his former show, actually. I did a story about this
Right.
last week and said, isn't it, he suggested that it amounts to material support for terrorism for Senator Chris Van Hollen to go and visit his former constituent in El Salvador. And,
Yeah.
that's not just rhetoric. This guy is in charge of exactly that portfolio. And that's the point I'm trying to
Yeah.
make. It's like, please take this, don't laugh it off. Like he actually has the
Yeah.
power to do that this time.
Take it literally, seriously, technically, do
Yeah, I
all the
think there's this
things.
tendency to laugh it off because he
Right,
is
because
this
it's so
cartoonish,
stupid.
yeah, James
Yeah.
Bond villain sort of character, which I understand, but at the same time, this is not Trump 1. This is a very different administration in a number of ways.
And yet, we continue to be just completely flat-footed when it comes to this. So, we have Gorka, we have what else are you seeing in this admin that's keeping you up at night?
Well, you talked about, being flat-footed. It's the complete lack of an opposition. I mean, for my job as a reporter, I talk to a lot of conservatives, and I have had ones who are like true, dyed-in-the-wool MAGA saying to me, even I'm getting a little nervous at how little pushback there is because a lot of them will be kind of like, Trump can go a little far sometimes, and I was having a
Yeah,
conversation with one friend who was just like, yeah, even we kind of want him to be hemmed in a little bit. Like, where are the
yeah.
Democrats? And it's like, even the Republicans are saying this
Can
now.
you imagine? I mean, that's the thing, it's like, remember with Trump, when he was running for office, everyone would say, "Well, he can't actually do that. They won't let him do that. It won't." He said he would do that last time and he wasn't able to. So now he has done it. He is able to. He keeps doing it. We're seeing some pushback. But the other thing is like the reason that AOC, and again, I really like AOC, and I think you and I are more aligned when it comes politically to that. But like the reason AOC is polling as the number one or number two candidate is because she is doing stuff, right? And that's why
Thank you.
Cory Booker's on that list. That's why, I mean, you get on that list because you do stuff. You don't get on that list because you go on a conventional cable network.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, time after time, the Democrats are seeing efforts to address the public as being rewarded, not just in terms of contributions, but just the public seeing like, okay, well, here's someone who wants to say anything. Someone like Cory Booker, for example, and AOC, you compare them, there's divergence on a lot of policy issues.
Huge,
So,
huge.
but that's not how people think necessarily. If you're, an everyday person who doesn't have whatever brainworm compels you and I and people like us to follow this stuff really closely, you're just going to see on the one side, Trump is swinging a bat around and nobody's stopping him. And on the other side, inaction. And that's something that I think, um, when you look at stuff like Doge, for instance, I don't know that your ordinary person is kind of like thinking about the specifics of, okay, we need the State Department's humanitarian affairs officers in country. Like I might think that, but if you don't have time to sort of read up on what these agencies do, you're just going to see, okay, they seem to be doing a lot of stuff, and then the other side, I don't know where they are. And so I think it's more of a who's doing something versus who's on the left or who's farther on the left. which might have typified the 2020 and 2016 elections in people's
Right.
minds. I think it's a different game now.
So let's talk about Doge. I hate even talking about Doge because it's so stupid.
He's winning just
Let's
by saying the word. It's so
I
annoying.
right? He wins by saying the word. So Doge has a wall of receipts. It every day practically there's less and less receipts on the wall because somebody has gone and looked at them and they're not saving any money they're from the George W. Bush administration, etc. So I'm wondering if you can explain to us why Elon is still cutting if he's not saving money. And also, how is he not saving money, right? Like he ended all of this aid. So all this money from farmers, these farmers didn't get the money, right? I was talking to Dana Nessel, the Attorney General from the state of Michigan, and I was saying she was telling me that these farmers she has are not they have all this wheat or whatever you farm, strawberries, I don't know. And USAID is not buying it, even though they said they were going to, because Elon ended the USAID programs, right? Or the State Department or whatever. So they've cut so much stuff. Why are they not saving more money?
Yeah, so the places that they're targeting for the cuts is where the least amount of money is. If you look at these
Mm,
State Department programs, things like foreign aid, which it should be said, polls relatively poorly, unfortunately. That's what it is. It doesn't represent that much money. It's a pretty small percentage of the budget. On the other hand, the agencies that do and departments that do represent a lot of money, like the Pentagon, for instance, huge amounts of money. That's where Secretary of Defense Hegseth is saying we're going to make Trump said this too. We're going to make a record-shattering $1 trillion budget, which we've never done before. That's where the real money is, and that's where they're most hesitant to cut. I mean, I guess the Trump administration would say, "Well, we're going to look at that and wait and see." But when I hear 1 trillion, I think, well, how does that fit into all of this? So it's kind of like we're having this laser focus on some of these agencies that, whatever you think of them, just don't represent that much money. And then the ones that do, there's not the commensurate amount of attention. So I think that's the natural outcome of it. And I think another thing that has to be said is that there is a lot of waste in government. I don't deny that that's the case. And I think that a lot of people feel that way. But you have to talk about what you mean by that. Where is it? And there doesn't seem to be. I mean, if you want to use the metaphor of using a scalpel, they're using a sledgehammer to just swing down on these things without looking at any of it, to the point that even some, fiscally, even some voices of fiscal restraint or whatever are like, wow, people they need to pay a little bit more attention to what they're doing here. So I think, to answer your question, it's the lack of focus on where the money really is. In addition to that, it seems like they're in their own political echo chamber where Musk can just tweet out. Do you remember this one where they were like, we saved all this from, it was like, condoms to Africa or something,
yes,
some program that was
yes.
completely false, or contraceptives to
Yeah.
Gaza or something. And it
Yeah,
turns
yeah.
out it wasn't Gaza, like Gaza in the Middle East. It was like some other location for a completely different
Yeah.
purpose.
But
So
it
they
didn't
can just say
matter, right?
no, they
Because
say these
they
falsehoods and it
ran on it. Yeah.
circulates in their
Yeah.
media chamber that affirms it. And so the scary thing from talking to people, that sense that I've gotten, is that, I thought that maybe, they were kind of playing the organ here and manipulating media and the more I investigate this stuff, the more I think they actually believe their own BS
Yeah.
of
Why
that
wouldn't
they're
they?
saving. So I think, to answer your question, why are they doing this when they're not really saving anything? That presupposes that they realize that they're not saving anything versus believing their own memes from like Kekistan 69 or whatever on Twitter. That's like, he saved $10 trillion. We're doing amazing. I think they believe that stuff. That's what
Right. No,
that's
no.
that's the sense that I've gotten.
I think that's absolutely right. And it is, I mean, it's just so fucked up. Talk to me about Maha making America healthy again. It's
Um,
ironic and
yeah,
it's
so that's the RFK
bizarre.
Jr. That's
Yeah.
like the RFK Jr. thing, which again, I do want to affirm that I did a story just interviewing people who liked him, and I try to let them talk and I don't cut in, and because I want to know what causes someone to think that way.
Right.
Um, because he's anti-vax. He says he's going to solve autism by, I think, the end of summer or something. It's just all these
Yeah.
completely bizarre things. And when I spoke
He's
to
gonna
people,
solve autism. That's
right,
right. I forgot all about that. Yeah.
when I spoke to people, I was really struck by that, understanding where they're coming from, because they were like talking about childhood obesity and the food system, and it was stuff that was like honestly felt like a legitimate, and B, stuff that was not being spoken to. I did a story
Right.
on how during the presidential election between Kamala Harris and Trump, neither of them in their convention speeches said more than one or two words about healthcare. It just was not a focus of the election. And so there was this information vacuum around, even though that, you could say that there were certain policies that both of them would favor. They didn't focus on it. That wasn't the
Right.
focus of the election. What was striking to me was that was the first time in my adult life that there was a presidential election where that wasn't the center, not just the centerpiece, but not in the election anywhere, because it was Obama in '08. You remember that was like a central theme of
Yeah.
this thing, the
He
ACA.
is.
And then 2016, Sanders, that was obviously the focus of his. And then Clinton responded to that. And then in 2020, people forget this, but Biden, in response, I think, to Bernie Sanders' campaign, said, I'm open to a public option. And that also was, I mean, maybe it wasn't like the centerpiece, but it was a core issue in the election. And then in this
Mhm.
last election, it was much vaguer stuff about democracy and
Right.
propriety and all these things. And it was like,
And
what
also
happened to
Liz
this
Cheney,
Liz Cheney? Exactly. Yeah. Like,
America's favorite.
in
Yes.
January 6th, which I think was a bad thing, but it's kind of like, okay, it's, been a number of years. Like, what are the issues here that are kind of like pressing? And they said almost nothing about it. And my sense from talking to people was that vacuum was like, okay, here's one guy saying something about it. And a lot of them, you ask them specifics and they go, well, I don't agree with everything he says. And he does have some weird stuff. But I think they see it as he's the only game in town for somebody that's really publicly articulating something about this. And obviously, I think it's crazy. You think it's crazy. It is crazy, but it's
Right.
something. And if there's
Yeah.
nothing else, where else are people without much time going to go to hear a different point of view? Because there are real problems. There is a real problem with our food system. And with,
Yeah.
there's no reason the US should have the public health problems that it does, that comparable,
Well,
developed countries
it,
don't.
it's about to get a lot worse. I'm wondering if you could explain to us sort of what you think is going to happen when it comes to what RFK is doing at
Well,
HHS.
when he says that he's going to solve autism, what he's referring to is that they're looking at studies to try to come to a conclusion. And I think we can all guess what the conclusion is going to be because he's dedicated a huge portion of his career to alleging this connection between autism and vaccines, which has been discredited time and again. So it seems like they're going to try to come up with some sort of basis for that, and God knows what policy will follow from that, because it's not just a study, and the department can say, okay, based on this study, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. So all of this is very
Mhm.
concerning, and I should point out, very different than a lot of the reasons people I talk to, at least, were excited about him. There are certainly anti-vaxxers in the country, and not an insignificant number. But again, a lot of them were interested in things like child obesity, childhood rising rates of cancer, and things. Again, stuff that is true. I would guess that, environmental causes have led to more issues, generally speaking. So I understand the concern. But what would this isn't going to solve any of that? Worse than that, it's going to make certain things worse. I mean, you saw his comments recently where he's like, people with autism can't enjoy a baseball game. It's like, does this guy know, for all the years he spent on his autism vaccine thing, has he ever talked to somebody with, there are a lot of people on the spectrum that
Right.
enjoy sports.
Right.
Like, what? It's just scary because it shows that he
Including
hasn't,
Elon, right? Isn't Elon on this? But Elon
he
said
said
he's on
that,
the
yeah,
spectrum,
he
and
said
then
so.
yeah, and then we have RFK saying that he'll never pay, that people on the spectrum will never pay taxes.
So it's like, has this guy looked at the thing that he's about to solve? It's very concerning, because this is not an edge case. These are things you say when you haven't even read the Wikipedia about something.
I can't even tell you how depressing this is. Really is so dark. Tell me what else you are seeing in this administration that is just melting your brain.
Well, I've been focused on the foreign policy details. So a lot of stuff gets overlooked when a figure like Trump can take all the air out of the room and say something that's just so bizarre or weird or funny or whatever it is that everybody, it's almost like the magician. He's moving his hand here and you're all looking there while he's doing something else in the other place. And so I'll give you an example. So the US military had its largest ever deployment of B-2 bombers. These are like bombers designed during the Cold War to penetrate deep into Russia to be able to drop nuclear ordnance and get out of there undetected, stealth bombers. So we have 6 of them in Diogo Garcia. And the purpose of that is to, project to Iran a message of that, hey, we've got guys here and this is going to happen if you don't agree. Trump has very openly said, it will be bombing the likes of which you'd never seen if you don't come to some kind of agreement with us. So that's really concerning. And that adds a texture to the policy that Trump's language doesn't. Because when he says bombing,
Right.
you don't exactly know what that means. Because we have bombed Iranian-backed militias. We do that, with some level of frequency. We've bombed the Houthis in Yemen. But the B-2s, that's something, it's a very expensive fleet to maintain. Each one costs like $1 billion. And you only have, I think, like 10 of them. So we have the majority, not just the biggest deployment. This is most of the fleet that you can actually use, because the other ones are often in maintenance, things like that. So that is a huge, just kind of like instance of saber rattling here that could very easily be tapped by the Pentagon if he decides one day that he wants to do this. And it's something that should be debated, because the stealth features of these aircraft suggest that they want to get deep into Iran and maybe hit the nuclear facilities, other command and control facilities, because otherwise you would just use we have all sorts of other fighter jets, things like F-16s in theater that we could use instead. So this is all very worrying. Again, something just like Gorka, something you hear almost nothing about, because all of
Right.
the attention is on, Hegseth did some crazy thing or Trump said some bizarre thing, which is understandable, but that overlooks a lot of the complexion of what it is that Trump is doing. Because it's so much, when he says something, the military goes, okay, we need to give him options so that he can act on the rhetoric that he's reflecting. And that part is the part that never gets covered.
And also there's also a leak, right? There were leaks out of the Pentagon this week.
Yeah, 3 people were put on leave for alleged unauthorized disclosure of classified information. That, of course, follows Secretary of Defense Hegseth and the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz is chatting on a Signal
Signal gate.
chat. Yeah,
Yes.
about
Yes.
pre operate. I'm a journalist, so I'm very much in favor of public disclosure and things. And I
Right.
would have published those texts immediately. That being said, right after the strikes were carried out. That being said, they're talking about something right before it's to be done. That is like the exact category of information that there's the strongest case for that should be withheld. So
Yeah.
it speaks to a cavalier attitude, a recklessness that's taking place behind the scenes. And what that tells us is that the public facing kind of silly craziness and absurdity that we see, that's happening behind the scenes too. That's not just an
Yeah.
image. That's not just, a showman quality that he's doing to try to trigger the libs and trigger the media. That's also happening in the serious ways too. Because, you want to talk about Doge, our government spends billions in tax dollars to create sensitive facilities that can block out, foreign adversaries from being able to spy on what we're saying. Really sophisticated stuff. So, for instance, if you're having a conversation with someone in, I don't know, your apartment, there's a window. There's technology that nation states have that can go and look at the vibrations on the glass from the window and deduce from that like a transcript of what you're saying. So
Yikes.
this is serious stuff that we have all of this expensive equipment in place to ensure that they have secure communications. And at least in that one instance, it's clear that they weren't using it. I would guess that there were a lot of instances they're not using it. And so again, the point being, they're just as unserious in private, it seems, as they are in public.
I'm so depressed. I was feeling worse, but now I'm feeling bad again. Thank you, Ken.
Well, I would say it is interesting to see Van Hollen go out there and the response that
Yeah, I
happens,
was a little
and the fact.
shocked that were you shocked that Van Hollen went out there? I thought that was pretty cool.
Not just that, but by the response. How many times has Hakeem Jeffries gone on television and said, what leverage do we have? What can we do? Look at how engaged people are when you go and do something like this. And this is on a
Yes.
fairly controversial issue. I was looking at some of the polling on it. It's pretty split, people's views on
Right.
these things. People have, you know, uh, immigration policy is not how I would like it to be, but people have different views. And so,
Right.
he took a tough issue, went out there, and I saw, at least on social media and press coverage, huge interest in this from parts of the public that some of the same, Democratic consultants would say, oh, young people are checked out and they don't want to pay attention. No, you
No.
haven't given them something to engage with. You mentioned a
Yeah.
couple other examples, like Cory Booker giving his speech in
Yeah.
Congress. I mean, these are figures that represent pretty different ideological tendencies, and everybody seems to, more or less, all sorts of people respond positively to it when they try to do something. So I think there's that to
Yeah.
be positive about. The only thing they need to do is bother to get out there and do something,
Yeah.
regardless of. It's not even an ideological question to me. It's do you pay the public the respect to actually address them with things instead of just doing deals in the background and
No, it's a really, really, really important question. Thank you, Ken.